All right, if we do this right, this should be the final time we read from Fahrenheit 451. So this should take us right down to the end of the novel. Let me see here. Yesterday when we ran, Montag gets out of the stream. Yesterday when we read, Montag gets out of the stream. He's done running. He follows along the railroad tracks, and then he sees a fire somewhere deep in the woods and starts taking off towards it. He comes across a group of guys led by a man named Granger. I told you I call them Granger's Rangers. You don't have to know all the names, but the main guy, who you should write down in the characters part of your note packet, his name is Granger. So he's the leader of the group, and Montag gets there, and they watch on a handheld portable TV set. They watch the chase conclude as a fake Montag is attacked by the Hound and killed, so that everyone in the city feels safe that this fugitive from justice has been captured, and now they're all set. And Montag feels terrible that someone else has been killed to satisfy them, but what's he going to do? He's now with these guys, and they explain how their goal is to save books just by reading them. And they have a way to get the books out of their heads if they need them. There's a process which they can use to get the books out of their brains. Even if you've only read it one time, even if you don't remember it, they can get the books out of your brain. So they've all read a book or two, and now there's like this big network of former professors and stuff who are nationwide, and they're all preserving the books, getting it through their heads that they weren't important, that they're just, as Granger puts it, we're just dust jackets for books. We're just the covers of books. We don't think of ourselves as any more important or less important. We're just dust covers for books so that we keep them safe until a time when people are allowed to read again. So where we left off, the group got done talking to Montag and asked him to be part of their group, and they were putting out their campfire, and that was the first time that Montag actually fought a fire by putting it out with the dirt, throwing dirt on it. So we're in the middle of 147. They stood by the river in the starlight. Montag saw the luminous dial of his waterproof watch. 5 o'clock in the morning. Another year ticked by in a single hour, and dawn waiting beyond the far bank of the river. Why do you trust me? Asked Montag aloud. A man moved in the darkness. Well, the look of you's enough. You haven't seen yourself in a mirror lately. Beyond that, the city's never cared so much about us to bother with an elaborate chase like this just to find us. A few crackpots with verses in their heads can't touch them, and they know it. We know it. Everyone knows it. So long as the vast population doesn't wander around quoting the Magna Carta and the Constitution, it's all right. The firemen were enough to check that now and then. No, cities don't bother us. And you look like hell. So it's probably Granger who answers, says, you don't look, we trust you because you look like you've been on the run. We believe the TV show that we saw. They moved along the bank of the river going south. Montag tried to see the men's faces, the old faces that he remembered from the firelight, lined and tired. He was looking for a brightness, a resolve, a triumph over tomorrow that hardly seemed to be there. Perhaps he had expected their faces to burn and glitter with the knowledge that they carried, to glow as lanterns glow with the light in them. But all the light had come from the campfire, and these men had seemed no different than any others who had run a long race, searched a long search, seen good things destroyed, and now, very late, were gathered to wait for the end of the party and the blowing out of the lamps. They weren't at all certain that the things that they carried in their heads might make every future dawn glow with a purer light. They were sure of nothing, save that the books were on file behind their quiet eyes. The books were waiting with their pages uncut for the customers who might come by in later years, some with clean and some with dirty fingers. Montag squinted from one face to another as they walked. Don't judge a book by its cover, someone said, and they all laughed quietly, moving downstream. That's a joke, because he says don't judge a book by its cover, and they're all dust jackets for books. So he's like, oh, don't pick on Montag for looking all disheveled. That would be like judging a book by its cover. Get it? Anyway, Montag takes a moment as he's walking. He's like trying to sneak looks at their faces like, He half expects them, because they're so smart and they've read books, to like be glowing with knowledge, and they're not. And he's like, man, these people aren't even glowing. They kind of look just like anybody else who's lived a long, hard life. They don't really look like they've got something special behind their eyeballs. But They do. They have the knowledge behind their eyeballs in their heads, but they're not. It doesn't have any physical effect. Montag like half expects them to be glowing from it, and they're not. There was a shriek from the jets, and There was a shriek, and the jets from the city were gone overhead long before the men looked up. Montag stared back at the city, far down the river. It was only a faint glow now. "My wife's back there," he said. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Cities won't do well in the next few days," said Granger. "It's strange, I don't miss her. It's strange I don't feel much of anything," said Montag. "Why, even if she dies, I realized a moment ago, I don't think I'll feel sad. It isn't right. Something must be wrong with me." "I'll listen." Now, remember, I said there's 3 parts to the book. Each part has a speech. So this is part 3's speech. Granger gives him a little speech, and he's going a long way around to make his point. I mean, he's like really taking the long way. Montag's last thing he said is, "It's strange I don't miss her. It's strange I don't feel much of anything," meaning for her. "Even if she dies, I realized a moment ago, I don't think I'll feel sad. It isn't right. Something must be wrong with me." So Montag thinks, like, I must be a bad guy. I mean, I spent 10 years of my life with this woman. She's still technically my wife. And if she dies, like in this war, like if they bomb a city and she dies, I don't even think I'm going to cry. Because it was like I don't even know her. It was weird. So Granger's trying to explain to Montag why he feels that way. But he goes about it in a real roundabout way. He's trying to explain, like, this is why you feel like you don't know your wife. "Listen," said Granger, taking his arm and walking with him, holding aside the bushes to let him pass. "When I was a boy, my grandfather died, and he was a sculptor. He was also a very kind man who had a lot of love to give the world, and he helped clean up the slum in our town, and he made toys for us, and he did a million things in his lifetime. He was always busy with his hands. And when he died, I suddenly realized I wasn't crying for him at all, but I was crying for all the things he did. I cried because he would never do them again. He would never carve another piece of wood or help us raise doves and pigeons in the backyard or play the violin the way he did or tell us jokes the way he did. He was part of us, and when he died all the actions stopped dead too, and there was no one to do them just the way he did. He was an individual. He was an important man. I have never gotten over his death. Often I think what wonderful carvings never came to birth because he died, how many jokes are missing from the world, and how many homing pigeons untouched by his hands. He shaped the world. He did things to the world. The world was bankrupted of 10 million fine actions the night he passed on." So his answer is, it seems kind of cruel at first. He's like, "Man, my wife and I are having real problems. If she dies, I don't even think I'll remember." And he's like, "My grandfather." And it's like, you're like, wait, are you changing the subject? Are you like totally not aware that Montag's like having a psychological moment trying to share something with you and you just like start talking about your grandpa? That's not what he means. He's saying, in the end, the reason that you don't feel anything for Millie is because she never did anything. What did she really do? What did she contribute? What actions are you missing because you don't have Millie anymore? She didn't do anything. She didn't even butter her own toast. She wouldn't even listen to you. Her earbuds were in constantly. Whenever she was talking to you, she wouldn't even take her earbuds out. She didn't accomplish it. She didn't do anything. The reason you don't miss Millie is because she never did anything. With her hands, she never produced anything. She didn't touch anyone and make them different. She just sat and watched TV all day, every day. That was it. So what are you really supposed to miss? There's nothing there to miss. So that's what he's saying. He says, I miss my grandpa because my grandpa did like a million things. He used to carve wooden sculptures for us, and he used to train homing pigeons, and he used to clean up our neighborhood when it got dirty. He missed his grandfather because his grandfather did something with his life. Montag doesn't miss Millie because she never does anything. And there's a theme in there somewhere about, do something with your life, otherwise people will never remember you. Montag is realizing what he's saying. He's like, oh, I get it. Like, Millie didn't do anything, so that's why I don't remember. Montag walked in silence. Oh, Millie, he whispered. Poor Millie. What? Oh, my wife, poor Millie. Poor Millie. I can't remember anything. I think of her hands, but I don't see them doing anything at all. They just hang there at her sides, or they lie there on her lap, or maybe there's a cigarette in them, but that's all. And now Montag's applying this test to his own life. He's like, yeah, Millie, you didn't do anything. And he's like, yeah, well, what did I do? She didn't do anything, but I actually tore stuff down. I actually burned books. At least she wasn't tearing society down. I was out there burning books all day, every day, so that she could sit there and watch TV. At least she wasn't destroying things. So he applies that same test to himself. Montag turned and glanced back. And what did you give to the city, Montag? He asked himself. Ashes. What did others give to the city? Nothingness. Granger stood looking back with Montag. So Montag realizes, like, yeah, by that definition, I haven't really accomplished very much either, and I'm not much better off than Millie. Granger stood looking back with Montag. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted, something that your hand touched, so your soul has somewhere to go when you die, and when people look at that tree or that flower that you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who just cuts lawn and a real gardener is in the touching, he said. The lawn cutter might just as well not have been there at all. The gardener will be there for a lifetime. So remember, he starts this conversation out by saying my grandfather was a sculptor. He didn't mean that in reality. He didn't take clay and make stuff out of it. He never says he does anyway. What he means by a sculptor is he changed the world around him. He molded the world. He helped change people's ideas and opinions. That's what he did. That's why I miss him. That's why in my brain he still lives there. And Millie, not so much. He doesn't say this, but that's what Montag's thinking. Granger moved his hand. My grandfather showed me some V2 rocket films once, 50 years ago. Have you ever seen an atom bomb mushroom from 200 miles up? Why, it's a pinprick. It's nothing with all the wilderness around it. My grandfather ran off V2 rocket films dozens of times and then hoped that someday our cities would open up more and let the green and the land and the wilderness in to remind people that we're allotted a little space on Earth and that we survive in that wilderness that can take back what it's given us as easily as blowing its breath or sending us the sea to tell us we're not so big. When we forget how close the wilderness is in the night, my grandpa said, someday it will come in and get us, for we will have forgotten how terrible and real it can be. You see, Granger turned to Montag, grandfather's been dead all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find the big ridges of his thumbprint. So he says, my grandfather taught me this lesson that we need more nature and less technology. That's basically the lesson that he says his grandfather taught him. He says, if you could unscrew my brain and lift it up and look at the wrinkles in my brain, you'd see my grandfather there. That's why I remember him, because he actually made an impact on my life. And that's why you don't remember Millie, because she didn't say or do anything profound or really teach you anything or get you to think much. Okay. Grandfather's been dead for all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find the big ridges of his thumbprint. He touched me, as I said earlier. He was a sculptor. I hate a Roman named status quo, he said. Stuff your eyes with wonder, he said. Live as if you'd drop dead in 10 seconds. Go and see the world. It's more fantastic than any dream made or paid for in factories. Ask for no guarantees, ask for no security. There never was such an animal, and if there were, it would be related to the great sloth, which hangs upside down in a tree all day every day, sleeping its life away. Oh, to hell with that, he said. Shake the tree and knock the great sloth down on his ass. So he's got this metaphor for people who go through their lives without having any meaning. He says it's like a sloth in a tree who doesn't accomplish anything. That's what my grandfather said. It would be, if you ask, he says, ask for no guarantees, ask for no security. There never was such an animal. As if guarantees and security, like, don't ask for any guarantee. Don't assume that somehow you're entitled to something, whether it's safety or a guarantee. Always be in charge of your own life. For example, I was just talking about this with my brother the other day. We're both happen to be teachers, and teachers have a retirement plan. So, for example, when I retire, I get a portion of my final year's salary. I keep getting a salary for years afterwards because I contribute in, it's called a pension. I don't want to explain how pensions work right now, but you understand what I'm saying. You give money in your whole career, and then when you retire, the company that you worked for, in this case it happens to be New York State, gives you money back as in your retirement so that you have something after you retire. But we were talking about how in these crazy financial times, wouldn't it be terrible if the state just decided, like, oh, we don't have money to pay these pensions anymore, so we're just going to cancel them all. And so that's what I think of when he says ask for no guarantees, don't ask for any security. Like, I'm making other plans beyond my pension from the state. I'm not just going to retire and hope that'll be there. I save other money in, like a different retirement account of my own, so that I'm not asking, so that I don't have this false sense of security, like, oh, when I retire, everything will be fine. I'm going to have extra money set aside that I keep track of, that I manage. I'm not just going to say, well, New York State can manage my money for me, and one day they'll give it back to me, because I don't trust them. So he says, don't ask for security. There never was such an animal. If you live your life going around saying, well, I just want a secure job, and I would like to have a guarantee that I'll have enough to survive on. That's not really living. That's living like a sloth. You're living in a tree hanging upside down, and you're not really accomplishing anything, because you haven't taken any chances. You haven't had any risk. So he says, to hell with that. Shake the tree and knock the great sloth down on his ass. Go and take a chance. Start your own business. Take that job that you were thumbing your nose at, and work your way up. I have a good friend who, his name's Mike. He started out working at the Pizza Hut in Catskill when we were in high school. He worked his way up to manager of Pizza Hut, and then Pizza Hut is owned by a larger corporation, and they made him a general manager. And then he ended up going to work for Chili's, the restaurant Chili's, and now he is the regional manager for Chili's, and his territory is like half of North Carolina. He makes a lot of money. He didn't ask for any security or guarantees. He didn't, he wasn't worried about it. He just, I'm going to go for it, man. He started off with a little something, and he made it his own. Take charge of your own life. He didn't wait for somebody to tell him, like, here's what you should do in life. I have my own story. We all have our own stories about how, I became a teacher or whatever. But I wanted to become a teacher. I told you guys I worked for Verizon for 5 years before, and that was for me. I just kind of did whatever was handed to me. I went to college, got my degree, and then somebody said, hey, man, I can get you in over at Verizon. You want to work there? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I did that for 5 years before I figured out, like, I don't want to do that. I want to be a teacher. And I was just kind of floating through life. You can't do that. You have to make your own path. Decide what you want to do and do it. Don't be the sloth in the tree. Don't hang out in the tree waiting for somebody to figure your life out for you. What do you want to do? Go after it. And even if you're not sure, even if you go the wrong direction 2 or 3 times, that's okay. That's okay. You can go the wrong direction. If Mike didn't really want to be a regional manager at the Chili's for Chili's restaurants, then he wouldn't have had to do that. He could have changed. So anyway, you have to make your own life. That's his point, which might even be a theme that you could write in your themes. Just saying. Okay. To hell with that, he said. Shake the tree and knock the great sloth down on his ass. Look, cried Montag, and the war began and ended in that instant. So right at the peak of Granger's speech, just as he's making his best point, Montag's like, look! And overhead, these planes go flying by, like lightning, as fast as can be. I think he says 5,000 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, poof, the war began and ended in an instant. What does that mean? We'll read and find out. Later, the men around Montag could not say if they had really seen anything. Perhaps the merest flourish of light and motion in the sky. Perhaps the bombs were there, and the jets 10 miles, 5 miles, 1 mile up for the merest instant, like grain thrown over the heavens by a great sewing hand, and the bombs drifting down with dreadful swiftness, yet sudden slowness, down upon the mourning city they had left behind. The bombardment was, to all intents and purposes, finished once the jets had sighted their targets, alerted the bombardier at 5,000 miles an hour. As quick as the whisper of a scythe, the war was finished. A scythe is the blade that you reap, that you cut grain with. It's a long blade that's like curved at the end, and like if you swing it, it makes just the noise of just the grain cutting. Is just like a whisper sound. So all of a sudden, these planes go flying by like the whisper of a scythe, and bam, bombs are falling from them. Once the bomb release was yanked, it was over. Now, a full 3 seconds, all of the time in human history before the bombs struck, the enemy ships themselves were gone, halfway around the visible world, like bullets in which a savage native islander might not believe because they were invisible. Yet the heart is suddenly shattered, the body falls in separate motions, and the blood is astonished to be freed on the air. The brain squanders its few precious memories and, puzzled, dies. So standing there, he hears the end of Granger's speech, and then, whoo, look, these planes go flying by. They drop all these bombs. In a second, he even says it looks like, I always picture, he says it looks like the hand of a sower, like someone who was planting seeds. And by planting them, they were just sticking their hand in a bag and throwing the seeds out, kind of like, I think of like Johnny Appleseed. And they're just throwing the seeds out, hoping that some of the seeds land on good soil and are able to become plants. It looked like seeds falling from these bombs. And the planes were moving, the ships were moving so fast, they were like bullets that if you had never seen a bullet before, if you were someone who had never seen a bullet, a savage islander, if you had just discovered an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with people on it and they'd never seen a bullet before, you might not even believe in bullets. And then that's how fast these planes go. Like, you might not even believe they were there. They went by so fast, like, wow, the planes are gone already. But slowly, all the bombs start from a distance. They're far off on a hill looking back at the city, and from a distance they can see all the bombs just... And in his head, Montag starts to think, this was not to be believed. It was merely a gesture. No, it's really happening. When he says it's not to be believed, he's like, this is too insane that it's like, holy crap, this can't really be happening. This was not to be believed. It was merely a gesture. Montag saw the flirt of a great metal fist over the far city, and he knew the scream of the jets that would follow would say after the deed, disintegrate, leave no stone on another, perish, die. Montag held the bombs in the sky for a single moment with his mind and his hands reaching helplessly up at them. Run! He cried to Faber, to Clarice. Run! To Mildred. Get out of there! But Clarice, he remembered, was dead, and Faber was out. There in the deep valleys of the country, somewhere the 5 a.m. bus was on its way from one desolation to another. Though the desolation had not yet arrived, was still in the air, it was as certain as man could make it. Before the bus had run another 50 yards on the highway, its destination would be meaningless, and its point of departure changed from metropolis to junkyard. So remember, when he left Faber's house, Faber said he was going to go to St. Louis. He was taking a 5 a.m. bus that morning. So as Montag looks and watches the bombs falling on the city, he thinks to himself, run, get out of there, Faber, go, run. Like, as if, it's like when you're watching a horror movie and you're telling the people, like, don't go that direction, no. And Montag's like, no, run. And he remembers, wait a second, Clarice is already dead. And Faber did run. He left on a 5 a.m. bus, so he's probably in the outskirts of the city, safe from the bombs, because they're not going to bomb every blessed place. They're just bombing the city. He's safe from the bombs, but the point where the bus left from, the point of departure in San Diego, and the point that it's heading to, St. Louis, because they're probably going to bomb the other cities too, are going to be junkyards before the bus is gone another 50 yards on the highway. He says because they're traveling so fast, they're going to drop more bombs. Now, the bombs that they're talking about dropping, these would be bombs that, remember we talked about this originally back a while ago. The atomic bomb that ended World War II, while it was huge for its day, it's an atomic bomb. Nowadays, in 2021, we have nuclear bombs, which are far, far, far more powerful even than atomic bombs were. They could have up to 250-mile blast radius, whereas an atomic bomb, I think I told you this, if you set off an atomic bomb in the middle of the LA County Airport, the blast radius would remain inside the LA County Airport. It's got roughly a 10-mile radius for a very big atomic bomb. So but there's lots of them falling. So there's going to be a lot of atomic bombs falling on the city, and Montag can tell, wow, this is going to be bad. He knows from even the distance he's at. And no, he's not in any physical immediate danger right now. He's far enough away that he's not going to be hit with any bombs, but he can see them coming. Okay. And when it said the flirt of a great metal fist in the distance, what he means is one of the bombs hit, and it made like a giant pillar, and then the big plume of smoke at the top that kind of looks like a fist. Like the plume of smoke at the top is like that. So he saw one of the bombs hit early, and it already blew up, and he saw that one. And now he starts thinking to himself. So he said he was yelling to Clarice, to Faber, to Mildred to run, and then he realizes, well, Clarice is dead, Faber's gone. So he starts thinking about Millie, the other person he was worried about. And this is what he imagines. He imagines Millie spending her final seconds, if indeed she's still in the city, which I assume she is. He imagines her dying two different ways. So this is way one and then way two. And Mildred? Get out, run, he thought. He could see her in her hotel room. He's imagining this. He could see her in her hotel room somewhere, now in the half of a second remaining, with the bombs a yard, a foot, an inch from her building. He saw her leaning toward the great shimmering walls of color and motion, where the family talked and talked and talked to her, where the family prattled and chatted and said her name and smiled at her and said nothing of the bomb that was an inch, now a half an inch, now a quarter of an inch from the top of the hotel. Leaning into the wall, as if all the hunger of looking would find the secret of her sleepless unease there, Mildred leaning anxiously, nervously, as if to plunge, drop, fall into that swarming immensity of color, to drown in its bright happiness. The first bomb struck. "Mildred!" Perhaps, but who would ever know? So he thinks, here's what Mildred did. She's probably sitting in her hotel room watching a TV show, just kind of like, I love you, TV. Boom! And then the whole thing explodes and she's dead and she never even knew it was coming, because why would they tell you on the TV? That would kind of make you unhappy. There's nothing you could do about it. So why tell you that you're about to be killed? Or, he thinks, perhaps, but who would ever know, perhaps the great broadcasting stations with their beams of color and light and talk and chatter went first into oblivion. So he thinks, but maybe, just maybe, the TV stations were bombed first. Or maybe, just by luck, a bomb struck the TV station first. And maybe for just a millisecond, Millie had to do something that she's probably been terrified of. Oh, let's read it and then I'll cite. Montag, falling flat, going down, saw or felt or imagined he saw or felt the walls go dark in Millie's face. Heard her screaming, because in the millionth part of time left, she saw her own face reflected there in a mirror instead of a crystal ball. And it was such a wildly empty face, all by itself in the room, touching nothing, starved and eating of itself, that at last she recognized it as her own, and looked quickly up at the ceiling as it and the entire structure of the hotel blasted down upon her, carrying her with 1,000,000 pounds of brick, metal, plaster, and wood to meet the other people in the hives below, all on their quick way down to the cellar, where the explosion rid itself of them in its unreasonable way. So he thinks maybe the TV stations got bombed first, and what would happen if the TV went out? All of a sudden, the screen would be black. And what would she see? Instead of a crystal ball, the TV is the crystal ball in this metaphor, instead she would see a mirror, a black mirror. Have you ever dimmed your cell phone and just looked at the phone? You can see your face in it, right? In fact, there's a Netflix show called Black Mirror. They're talking about the TV screen when it's off. It's a black mirror. You see your face in it. So if the TV stations got bombed first, maybe Millie had a realization that she had wasted her life. All of a sudden, she's like, oh, boom, the TV went out. And she's like, gee, that's weird, the TV went out. But man, look at my face. I look old and haggard, like I do nothing but stare at a TV all day. Maybe I should get out and jog once in a while. Something, bam, and then she dies. So maybe she has a brief realization that maybe Guy wasn't crazy. Maybe I am spending too much time watching TV. So that's what he hopes. He imagines that that's how she died. Either way, it's pretty safe to assume she's dead. So Montag, in this process, he's standing there looking out over the sea, seeing the bombs falling. He's like, I better get on the ground. So he throws himself to the ground. As he does, he has this theory that that's how Millie died. And then he remembers something. I remember. Montag clung to the earth. I remember. Chicago a long time ago. Millie and I, that's where we met. I remember now. Chicago, a long time ago. So it's kind of like a bow tie on the end of their relationship, because he finally remembers where they met. And you remember the night that he came home and he had stolen the book, it became really important to him to know where they met. And he wanted to know where they met because he wanted to be able to like have something of their relationship, some memory of their relationship when they were back in love, because Clarice had rubbed the flower under his chin that day and she's like, oh, haha, none of the flower rubbed off. You must not be in love. So when he gets home that night, he's like, I am in love, and I want to remember when I was in love. When did we meet, Millie? Because I want to remember when we fell in love. And he couldn't remember. Neither could she, which is crazy, because my wife could tell you what I was wearing the day we met. Anyway, finally, he imagines that's how she died, and that's where they met. He remembers something about this insane tragedy of watching this entire city of San Diego be destroyed by atomic bombs, awakens a memory in him, and he can remember. The concussion knocked the air across and down the river. It turned the men over like dominoes in a line. It blew the water in lifting sprays and blew the dust and made the trees above them mourn with a great wind passing away south. Montag crushed himself down, squeezing himself small with his eyes tight. He blinked once, and in that instant he saw the city instead of the bombs in the air. Okay, this is a little weird. He says he's on the ground like, oh my gosh, there's this great wind from the atomic blast, And he opens his eyes for a second and looks down the hill at the city, and he sees the city in the air and the bombs below it. Because what would happen as these bombs fall, boom, the whole city would kind of lift up. And as he sees this, he thinks of it as like a reverse avalanche. An avalanche is when snow falls from the top of a mountain to the bottom. He sees it like the city is in reverse avalanche. It's being lifted off the ground because of the massive amount of explosions. And the buildings are like, and he says it's kind of like one of those weird abstract pictures where everything is sideways and crooked, and somebody's got an ear over here but their other ear's up here and their nose is like turned sideways. It's like one of those pictures because the whole city is all crazy looking as he looks at it for a second, because it's just been hit with these bombs. Like, things aren't that crazy. You could still tell there's a building there, and look over there's some other buildings, and you could see it's like the city just got raised off the ground a few hundred feet when the bombs hit. And everything got turned sideways or upside down. Okay. In that instant, he saw the city instead of the bombs in the air. They had displaced each other. For another of those impossible instants, the city stood, rebuilt and unrecognizable, taller than it had ever hoped or strived to be, taller than man had built it, erected at last in grouts of shattered concrete and sparkles of torn metal, into a mural hung like a reverse avalanche, a million colors, a million oddities, a door where a window should be, a top for a bottom, a side for a back. And then the city rolled over and fell down dead. The sound of its death came after. So, boom, these bombs go off, the city goes boom, 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 boom. Montag sees the city like suspended in midair, but all goofy and sideways, and that's it. Now, I don't know how much time goes by, but there's the pause there. I think it's probably been fairly soon after, but I don't know if they all get knocked out or what's going on, how long they lay there, but they lay there for a little bit. Montag, lying there, eyes gritted shut with dust, a fine wet cement of dust in his now shut mouth, gasping and crying, now thought again, I remember, and I remember something else. What is it? Yes, part of Ecclesiastes and Revelation, part of that book, part of it, quick now, quick before it gets away, before the shock wears off, before the wind dies down. Book of Ecclesiastes here, and he said it over to himself silently. Lying flat to the trembling earth, he said the words of it many times, and they were perfect, without trying, and there was no Denham's dentifrice anywhere. It was just a preacher by himself, standing there in his mind, looking at him. There, said a voice. So, remember how he was riding on the train, he was trying to read a passage from the Bible on the train, and the Denham's dentifrice kept interrupting him, and he couldn't memorize it, but all of a sudden, the force of this explosion, throwing himself on the ground, the insane tragedy of it all, it comes to him, and he's able to remember the lilies of the field. Remember, was what he was trying to remember. The men lay gasping like fish laid out on the grass. They held to the earth as children hold to familiar things, no matter how cold or dead, no matter what has happened or what will happen. Their fingers were clawed into the dirt, and they were all shouting to keep their eardrums from bursting, to keep their sanity from bursting, with their mouths open. Montag shouting with them, a protest against the wind that ripped their faces and tore their lips, making their noses bleed. Montag watched the great dust settle, and the great silence move down upon their world. And lying there, it seemed that he saw every single grain of dust and every blade of grass, and that he heard every cry and shout and whisper going up in the world now. Silence fell down in the sifting dust, and all the leisure they might need to look around, to gather the reality of this day into their senses. So as things start to settle down, Montag's like, holy smokes, that just happened. Makes me think of, I told you I lived in Windham. You guys were probably children at the time, 2011 Hurricane Irene. This August will be the 10th anniversary, right? I lived in Windham, which actually, believe it or not, even though it's on a mountain, got it way worse than a lot of other areas, because the creek runs right through the middle of the Batavia Kill Creek, and it flooded, and I live literally across the street from the Batavia Kill Creek, right on Main Street in Windham, and it makes me think of that, where, like, it was surreal, like, you felt like it wasn't real. There was literally a foot and a half of water in my downstairs, and it was just coming in and flowing, and there was nothing I could do, nowhere to go, couldn't get in the car, couldn't go away. And just afterwards, walking around, looking at your stuff, walking through the backyard and seeing other people's stuff that had washed down the street, and it was just crazy. It's surreal. You feel like this did not just happen. So that's how Montag feels as he's lying there in the dust. Montag looked at the river. We'll go on the river, he thought. He looked at the old railroad tracks. Or we'll go back that way. Or we'll walk on the highways now, and we'll have time to put things into ourselves. And some day, after it sets in us a long time, it'll come out of our hands and our mouths, and a lot of it'll be wrong, but just enough of it will be right. We'll just start walking today and see the world, and the way the world walks around and talks, the way it really looks. I want to see everything now, and while none of it will be me when it goes in, after a while it'll all gather together inside, and it will be me. Look at the world out there. My God, look at it out there, outside of me, out there beyond my face, and the only way to really touch it is to put it where it's finally inside of me, where it's in my blood, where it pumps around 1,000 times 10,000 a day. I'll get a hold of it, so it'll never run off. I'll hold on to the world tight someday. I've got one finger on it now, and that's a beginning. The wind died. What does he mean? He means I got to get out there and start living now. I got to go help people. I got to try to put the world back together. We have to do something now. I can't just I'm giving up being a fireman, but all that luxury, all that comfort, all the sitting around doing nothing, playing video games, watching TV, it's all gone. We have to start living now. We have to start doing things to improve the world again. And so he says, that's it. We're going to get up and we're going to go back towards that city and we're going to help people rebuild. That's what we're doing. The wind died down. The other men laid a while on the dawn edge of sleep, not yet ready to rise up and begin the day's obligations, its fires and foods, its thousands of details of putting foot after foot and hand after hand. They lay blinking with their eyelids dusty. You could hear them breathing fast, then slower, then slow. Montag sat up. He did not move any farther, however. The other men did likewise. The sun was touching the black horizon with a faint red tip. The air was cold and smelled of a coming rain. Silently, Granger arose, felt of his arms, legs, swearing incessantly under his breath, tears dripping from his face. He shuffled down the river to look upstream. It's flat, he said, a long time later. City looks like a heap of baking powder. It's gone. And a long time after that, I wonder how many knew it was coming. I wonder how many were surprised. And across the world, thought Montag, how many other cities were dead? And here in our country, how many? 100? 1,000? So, boom, the city's dead. It's an ash heap. They do think that people started getting out of the city, though. He says, I wonder how many knew it was coming. So people, some of the smarter people, probably did start leaving the city and saying, I'm not going to stay here because if there's a nuclear war, cities are going to be the first thing to go. So I'm going to start heading out towards the country. So some of them might have started heading out already. Someone struck a match and touched it to a piece of dry paper taken from their pockets, and shoved this under a bit of grass and leaves, and after a while added tiny twigs which were wet and sputtered but finally caught. And the fire grew large in the early mornings as the sun came up, and the men slowly turned from looking upriver, and they were drawn to the fire, awkwardly, with nothing to say, and the sun colored the backs of their necks as they bent down. Granger unfolded an oilskin with some bacon in it. We'll have a bite, and then we'll turn around and walk upstream. They'll be needing us up that way. Someone produced a small frying pan, and the bacon went into it, and the frying pan was set to the fire. After a moment the bacon began to flutter and dance in the pan, and the sputter of it filled the morning air with its aroma. The men watched this ritual silently. Granger looked into the fire. A phoenix. What? Said Montag. There was a silly damn bird called a phoenix back before Christ. Every few hundred years he built a funeral pyre and burned himself up. He must have been first cousin to mankind, but every time he burnt himself up, he sprang up back out of the ashes, got himself born all over again. So the city Phoenix is not what he's talking about. There's a city in Arizona, which is not that far from San Diego, called Phoenix, but that's not what he means. He's talking about the mythical bird, the phoenix, which used to, every few hundred years, kill itself but be reborn. And he says, man, that bird must be related to humankind, because this is basically humankind killing itself. And now you and I are going to help humankind be reborn, is what he's getting at. He must have been first cousin to mankind, said Granger, but every time he burnt himself up, he sprang out of the ashes and got himself born all over again. And it looks like we're doing the same thing, over and over. But we've got one damn thing the Phoenix never had. We know the damn silly things we just did. We know all the damn silly things we've done for 1,000 years. And as long as we know that and always have it around where we can see it, someday we'll stop making the goddamn funeral pyres and jumping in the middle of them. We pick up a few people every generation that remember. So he says, maybe one day mankind will stop killing itself, stop harming itself. He took the pan off the fire and let the bacon cool, and they ate it slowly, thoughtfully. Now, let's get on upstream, said Granger, and hold on to one thought. You're not important. You're not anything. Someday the load that we're carrying with us may help someone, but even when we had books on hand a long time ago, we didn't use what we got out of them. We went right on insulting the dead. We went right on spitting in the graves of all the poor ones who died before us. We're going to meet a lot of lonely people in the next week, and the next month, and the next year. And when they ask us what we're doing, you can say, we're remembering. That's where we'll win out in the long run. And someday we'll remember so much we'll build the biggest goddamn steam shovel in history and dig the biggest grave of all time and shove war in and cover it up. Come on now. We're going to go build a mirror factory first and put out nothing but mirrors for the next year and take a long look at them. So they're not actually going to build mirrors. They're going to show people how society got this way. They're going to remember things. They're going to be like, books were important because they had history in them, and history would teach us that humankind has this tendency to want to destroy itself. So he says that's what we're going to do. We're going to go remind people of their history, and we're going to help them. We're going to rebuild the world. They finished eating and put out the fire. The day was brightening all about them as if a pink lamp had been given some more wick. In the trees, the birds that had flown away quickly now came back and settled down again. Montag began walking, and after a moment he found that the others had fallen in behind him, heading north. He was surprised and moved aside to let Granger pass and take the lead, but Granger looked at him and nodded him on, so Montag went ahead. He looked at the river and the sky and the rusting track going down to where the farms lay, where the barns stood full of hay, where a lot of people had walked by in the night on their way out of the city. Later, in a month or 6 months, and certainly not more than a year from now, he would walk along here again, alone, and keep right on going, until he caught up with the people. So there are people fleeing, but they're heading into where the people came from, towards the city, to see if they can find any survivors. But now there was a long morning's walk until noon, and if the men were silent, it was because there was everything to think about and much to remember. Perhaps later in the morning, when the sun was up and had warmed them, they would begin to talk, or just say the things that they remembered, to be sure they were there, to be absolutely certain that things were safe in them. Montag felt the slow stir of words, the slow simmer, and when it came his turn, what could he say? What could he offer on a day like this to make the trip a little easier? To everything there is a season. Yes, a time to break down and a time to build up, yes. A time to keep silence and a time to speak, yes, all that, but what else? What else could he offer? Something. And on either side of the river was there a tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruit, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Yes, thought Montag, that's the one I'll save for noon. For noon, when we reach the city. And that's how the book ends. That's the end. He says, for noon when we reach the city. When we reach the city. You have to kind of think of it in reverse. So when we reach the city, I'm going to tell the guys this quote. And what is this quote? It's a quote from the Bible, from the book of Revelation. It's one of the final passages of the Bible, the book of Revelation is the final book of the Bible, and this comes from the end of that book. And it's the putting back together of the world after mankind has destroyed itself. If you read the book of Revelations, Satan leads a war using humanity to try and declare war against God, and God defeats Satan and puts in the Bible Jesus back on the throne to rule earth. So that's what the quote is that he's going to save for when they get there, that they're going to rebuild earth, that they can be the leaves on the trees for the healing of the nations. They themselves can do something to prevent humanity from totally ending. Okay, so that's how the book ends. I'm sure you're not super pumped about the ending. It's kind of a quick ending there, and Clarice does not come back. I'm sorry. I personally don't think she died, but that's just me. And Millie does not change. Millie dies. Maybe she does. I mean, for like a millisecond before she dies, but that's the conclusion. So, Mrs. Mudge will have some stuff for you to do, and good luck, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everybody. See you all next week.